In my first lecture, my computer died in the middle of it, and I was right here explaining how if you wanted to avoid using the concats and nesting them, if that was confusing, that you could go back to the way that we're familiar with putting strings together using the plus sign, and you could do your only one dot get name, the accessor, and then add a dash in between it and then go and get the skill so that you could print it all on one line. And so this is the case where we are trying to do the printout just for Mermaid Man, and that's the format we're familiar with. Well, when we have an array list of objects, we have to use a loop if we want to cycle through each one of them. And here I'm using a traditional for loop, which you've seen before. And I'm going to basically make sure you understand the format with an array list for getting information and printing it out. So here I have my typical for loop where I've set up my counter, and here I'm incrementing my counter so that I go through each and every one of the superheroes one at a time. Now notice here, because I'm not sure at any given time how many superheroes I have, because I might go back and add 3 or 4 more by cutting and pasting and changing information. So instead of me having to count each time and hard coding a number like 5 here, I less than 3 or 5 or whatever, I'm going to take the array list name and I'm going to use the dot size method that's provided in the array list class. Remember, array list is a class like string or any other class, and it has methods, and size is the method we use to get the total count of the number of items currently in the array list. Remember, it can increase or decrease, so at any given time, rather than hard coding, we're better off to use the array list name dot size to get the total count. Now notice I'm doing I less than, not less than equal to. If I do less than equal to, as this runs, I'm going to get an array index out of bounds error. Because if this has a 3 in it, remember I'm going 0, 1, 2, and if I try to access the 4th element, which would have an index number of 3, there is no 4th element. There are only 3 items in the array list. So I would get index out of bounds. So I'm doing I less than the size of 3. So I'll go 0, 1, 2. Now here's where it gets a little tricky. In a traditional for loop, when I'm using an array list, I've got to do the array list name dot get, and here notice in parentheses I put an I, meaning get the value at the index number of 0 and then 1 and then 2. And notice then I have to do another dot, and I have to use the accessor name in the cartoon characters class. So that's where it's a little tricky. I want to make sure you see the format. Array list name dot get sub I, or whatever your counter is, I used I, and then dot get name. And notice here I want to print the name followed by a dash followed by the skill on one line. So I do a print first, and then I just tack on using the plus sign, or I could have used dot concat here, the dash. Then I come out and do a print line, and now I'm going to get the skill. Superheroes is the array list name dot which one to get, which location to go to, 0, 1, or 2. That's what get I does. And then after I get that one back in memory, what piece of information do I want? Do I want the name, the skill, the alter ego, etc.? I want the skill. So that's the format, and you may just have to memorize it. Array list name dot get, and the one you want to get in the parens, whether it's I or hard-coded number, and then dot, and then one of the method names from your class. So that will print out exactly what I want and the way I want it with the print. It'll print out the name and the dash, then on the same line it will print the skill, then it will hit the carriage return, because I have a print line here, and go to the next line to be ready to print the next superhero. Now, should I want to modify or set or change one of the superheroes' names, I wanted to show you the format for that. It's ArrayList name dot, again, you've got to tell it which one to get before you do anything else. Do I want Batman, do I want Superman, or do I want Mighty Mouse? Batman's at index location 0, Superman's at 1, Mighty Mouse is at 2. So I'm going to go to Batman, so I'm hard coding the 0 here because I'm just demonstrating for you how to use a mutator outside of a for loop with an array list. So go to Batman, the first one in the list who has an index of 0, and now let me use the method setName to update his name to Batman in all caps. Okay, and I could do the same thing with skill. I could do set skill. I could change the skill here. I could change this from a 0 to a 1 and change Superman's information. So I just wanted to show you how I could do that outside of for loop. Since we're not using scanner, if we're doing things outside of a for loop, we're probably going to be hard coding the number in it. But when we're in a for loop, we're going to probably be going through each one and we're going to use a counter variable like I. Now I also wanted you to see the difference between the traditional for loop and the enhanced for loop. With ArrayLists, you can always use an enhanced for loop, and it's a little bit shorter, but I think it's a little trickier to remember than the traditional for loop. So with an enhanced for loop, I still use my for and I put some parentheses and I still have the braces, and the body or the code I want to execute still goes in between the braces. But notice that the condition and the counter and all of that looks a lot different in an enhanced for loop. So if I'm going to use an enhanced for loop, the first thing I put is the data type of the array list. So if I had declared an array list of strings, I would put the word string here. If I had declared an array list of integers, remember we have to use the wrapper class, which is integer spelled out with a capital I, then I would put integer here. If I had an array list of doubles, then I would put the word double with a capital D here. But since I've got an array list of cartoon characters, that's the type, that's the class file, that's what I put there. Then I put, in this case, I wanted to use the word counter. I could put an I here, I could put XYZ here. This is more or less your little counter variable here. Kinda, sorta. You can think of it that way. Then you put a colon, and then you put the name of the array list. So it's the type, whether it's string, integer, double, or your own custom type like cartoon characters. Then basically what you want to call your counter, in this case I'm calling it counter, I could have called it I, a colon, and then the name of the actual array list itself. Very different from this type of a for loop. And notice here, here's the other tricky thing about the enhanced for loop. Notice with the traditional, remember I said you have to put the array list name, which was superheroes, dot get, and tell it which one to get, and then dot method name, such as get name or get skill. Here I simply put counter dot method name. So counter dot skill. There's no superheroes dot get I or get counter dot get skill. It is simply counter dot get skill. And so counter more or less understands that you're going 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 in numerical order ascending, and it understands that it represents the array list. So you can shorten your code from this to this. So if I had used an I here, I would put I.getName. If I had used XYZ here, I would be putting XYZ.getName. Okay, and then I simply did the concat, so I would get the dash on there, and I did the same thing I did above with the print and the print line. So I wanted to show you with the enhanced for loop how that's a little bit shorter code, but you have to remember what you're doing with this one. However, whatever memory trick you need to remind yourself, it's the type, then whatever little name you want to use here, colon, the array list name, and then here it's not the array list name, it's whatever you call this here, this counter, this organizing variable here. you put right there with the dot method name. Now, the only trick with this is you can only go from the beginning to the end with this. I don't know of any way. Say I wanted to go from the end to the beginning. I wanted to print it in reverse order. Mighty Mouse, then Superman, then Batman. I don't know of a way to do that with an enhanced for loop unless I sort the array in that order and I change the order of the array and I make Mighty Mouse in the 0 position and Superman stays in 1 and Batman goes to 2, which that's going to be sorting arrays and array lists, which is way down the road in second semester. But just to print it out with a for loop, I could reverse it. Remember, I could say, I is equal to size minus 1, and then I could put I minus minus here. I could loop through it backwards. I don't know how to do that with an enhanced for loop. I don't think you can. I'm not sure how you could skip one either with an enhanced for loop. I haven't really tried to experiment and see if there's a way I could print out only, say, Batman and then Mighty Mouse and skip Superman. I don't know how I would do that in an enhanced for loop. But most of the time with an array list or an array, you really are going from the beginning to the end in the order that they're in the array list. So that works. So those are some of the tips and tricks I wanted to give you. Now in the assignment where I asked you to do this as part of an assignment, I had actually asked you to see if you could sort the array list in alphabetical order. And what I realized was the code that I gave you works for an array list of strings or doubles or integers. It does not work for an array list of your own custom objects where you have multiple instance variables. Because it doesn't know, well, does she mean for me to sort it on name or skill or alter ego or sidekick? It doesn't know what to do using the code that I gave you as a sample for an array list of strings, ints, or doubles. So again, we'd be back to sorting it alphabetically. We would have to use a sorting or searching technique that we have not learned yet and will not learn until second semester. So you can skip that. Do not attempt to try to use the collection.sort option to sort this alphabetically. It will not work. Those are all the things I can think of to tell you about array lists, for loops, traditional and enhanced. Just remember, it's a little more involved than when we were dealing with individual objects once we create an array list of objects. But once you get the format down, it shouldn't really be all that tricky. If you have any questions on this, please let me know. And you may want to watch these 2 recordings that I've done a couple of times. You've got to know enhanced for loops. You will definitely see that on the AP exam. And you've really got to understand array lists. You will see that as well. And you will see array lists of objects on there. So it's very important that you get these concepts.